Now, we all know that when it comes to the Prime Minister, you can trust everything he says all the time, right?
My word is my bond.
And certainly you can trust the Treasurer of Australia because, well, he's better than the rest of us. He's the one who did nothing when it came to cost of living last year. In fact, he took $1,500 off 10 million Australians. But it's okay. He's handing back $15 a week of your own money via tax changes. Now, we all remember that up Hill and down Dale, he told us that no, there'll be no changes to taxation policy.
We won't oppose the full package if it comes to the Senate unamended, because our highest priority is to make sure that Australians do receive that tax cut next week.
And it went on and on and on for years and years. And then, of course, despite the fact that they told us all the way through summer there was going to be no changes, of course, there were changes just around Australia Day.
Well, we have changed our view, and we've changed our view because we found a better way to provide more cost of living relief to more people in a way that doesn't add to inflation.
Well, there was a mega story that broke over the weekend that should have got way more attention today, and it's from my colleague and friend Andrew Clennell, and it's all to do with negative gearing. Now, of course, there are many Australians who see their only way of being able to create wealth for themselves, wealth for their retirement, and yes, wealth for their children, is to be able to own a home or be paying off a home and then get a loan to pay off another house, an investment property. Negative gearing. Literally, hundreds of thousands of people do this, and it is the only way that they can take the giant step up on the wealth ladder. But we're not talking about people who become instant millionaires. They're just people who are able to provide a rental property to somebody, and we know how much that's important at the moment, as well as, yes, at the end of the day when they play Kaplunk, a few $100,000 to be able to pay for the back nine of your life. Well, Grim Jim is saying exactly what he said about tax changes that were never ever going to happen about negative gearing.
We're not contemplating or considering resurrecting the policies that we took to the 2019 election.
But the exclusive that Andrew Clennell was able to get out of the government when he put in a Freedom of Information request, well, it has shown that the government is well and truly doing its homework via the department that the Treasurer is in charge of, that being the Treasury Department. They don't have hundreds, but they have 1,000 different documents about the potential changes this government might be looking into when it comes to negative gearing.
Sky News can reveal the Treasury Department has more than 1,000 documents in its possession, which it classes as advice from it to the Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, about changing the negative gearing and capital gains tax arrangements around investment properties.
Now, for his part, Chalmers' officers have said, no change, nothing going to happen. Of course, Jim Chalmers didn't say it. It was his office. There were no questions about it today in Parliament. I don't know why. There should be front and centre questions about this tomorrow in Parliament and some yes-no answers. You see, government is always allowed to look at lots of different options, but we know that when you start to look at options, it becomes politically weaponised. Back when the Turnbull government was looking about whether or not some of the back office staff who work in and around the health system might be able to be consolidated, it was referred to as privatising Medicare. The justification was because the bureaucrats had done some work about whether this was potentially a way to save money. It, of course, wasn't the privatisation of Medicare, but the opposition was allowed to say, well, it's clearly what they want to do, because if they didn't want to do it, why would they ask anyone to go and do the paperwork? Well, there's 1,000 documents that are telling us this government is doing the paperwork on changes to negative gearing. Now, remember, Jim Chalmers, who tells us with the same clarity that he did that there'll be no changes to tax policy as he took to the last election, all the way through the first couple of years of this government, only to change the tax policy, of course, went to the last election saying no changes to negative gearing, now tells everyone no changes to negative gearing. But which one do you think is actually the real Jim Chalmers? The one who's saying there's no changes to negative gearing, or the one who's allowed his bureaucrats to come up with 1,000 documents into the changes of negative gearing? And remember what he said in 2019 when changes to negative gearing was the policy of the Labor Party. I think this is the inner voice of the Treasurer that he is desperately finding a way to let out of the bag.
Any housing policy that doesn't deal with negative gearing and capital gains tax is a sham. Housing affordability, which doesn't make important and considered changes to capital gains and negative gearing, has a hole in the middle of it. If you want to deal with housing affordability, you need to start with negative gearing and capital gains.
Well, the real Grim Jim, please stand up. But I think you've just seen what the real Grim Jim is, the one who really would like to make the change. Watch this space, 1,000 documents, some questions in Parliament, please, because I'd love to see his answers. Well done to Andrew Clennell. Again, Sharry Markson as well, the team breaking big news. That's why you've always got to be watching us all day, every day, all night, and check out skynews.com.au. Now, let's talk about the smug politics of the Greens. Now, one of their newest MPs who came in a bit of a green slide, which meant many seats in southeast Queensland, went from blue, not to red, but blue straight out to green. And as I've said many times, this generation of Greens seem to want to do with renting what they did previously with the environment. Make it seem like that's their major policy, but the reality is it's all of the red stuff in the middle of the watermelon. Well, here was a question that was asked today by the housing spokesperson of the Greens trying to get under the Prime Minister's skin because he has rental properties.
Question to the Prime Minister. Why is Labor refusing to phase out the big tax handouts for property investors, including the capital gains tax discount and negative gearing that benefit wealthy property investors like yourself and the 75% of Labor politicians who own an investment property?
Now, it's fine for him to make the point that it is the Greens' position that they want to change negative gearing, they want to change capital gains tax. But what is misleading, deeply misleading, about the way that the question is asked is that it's as if there are no property investors in his own party, that there aren't any people literally sitting next to him in the Parliament. Instead, it's all evil landlords like the Prime Minister or many people on the government or opposition benches. But yet again, let's point out the reality that negative gearing is used by all sides of politics because, as I say, it is used by all types of people to create greater wealth for themselves and potentially intergenerational wealth for their families. Put simply, the few $100,000 that comes once you end up selling the property might end up being $100,000 you might be able to hand to your kids, so God forbid they could get anywhere near a deposit, let alone being able to buy a property. But can we play the question again? Because, again, it makes it seem like the Greens have no issue on this whatsoever. For want of a better term, no dirty hands. It's only those evil buggers in the major parties.
Question to the Prime Minister. Why is Labor refusing to phase out the big tax handouts for property investors, including the capital gains tax discount and negative gearing that benefit wealthy property investors like yourself and the 75% of Labor politicians who own an investment property?
All right, well, let's do it. These are the Greens MPs that have investment properties and are just part of the cadre that their own housing spokesperson is trying to throw under the bus. In the lower house, Elizabeth Watson-Brown is the member for Ryan. On the Parliament House website, you can go to the declarations of MPs about whether they've got shares, property holdings, and guess what? She's got property holdings. In terms of herself, she owns her residential house, an investment property and a flat. Her spouse owns 50% of the house they live in, plus the investment property and the holiday flat, as well as dependent children who end up owning a property in South Australia. Nick McKim is a senator from Tasmania. He has a residential property, he has a shack, and he has not one but two investment properties. These are the receipts that are freely available. But the Greens want to pretend that they are not working both sides of the aisle here. Penny Alleman Payne. Does everyone have a hyphen in their name in this party? She, of course, has a residential property in Queensland. Then she has an investment property as well. Oh, and then there's our old mate, Maureen Faruqi. I know bringing up her name means that I'm somehow doing some sort of dog whistle on race, just in case the Broadcasting Authority is planning to investigate the matter following her complaint. I'm not. I'm just pointing out the obvious hypocrisy of the political tactics of the Greens. Well, Maureen Faruqi, she has her place of residence, which is in New South Wales. She has an investment property in New South Wales. She has another investment property in New South Wales, and she's got a bit of land in Pakistan. Now, of course, the reason the Greens want to do this is because the Greens see great political advantage, regardless of whether it's right or wrong, political advantage in trying to turn as many renters in Australia into Greens voters. They would look the other way on everything from anti-Semitism to their tax policy, their defence policy, and all of the other madness that comes with the party. Now, of course, this is a well-timed attack because the rental queues couldn't be longer in metropolitan areas, particularly metropolitan Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, as well as regional areas. Places like Ipswich, where, as we've told you before, about 150 people are applying for just one vacant place. And there's political opportunity here because, as we've shown you before, 2021, the census, 30.6% of people are currently renting a home in Australia. Now, the major parties, and I've warned them about this, the major parties always look at the third column, the renting column, as just people who desperately like to buy a house one day. Now, that might be the case in 5 or 10 years' time, but it's not the case for the vast majority of people that are renting right now. They're just trying to keep a roof over their head. So if Labor and Liberal are only talking to renters as potential buyers, there is an opportunity in the market here for the Greens to push into an area where people are going to be renting and renting for some time. And why do I say that this is a political tactic of the Greens to increase their representation in the parliament? Because think about that number, 30.6% of the country are renters. But according to the 4 biggest opinion polls, the Greens' primary vote is now somewhere between 11 and 12.5%. If they can lift that to 15, 16, 17%, i.e. exclusively bouncing their vote due to renters who believe the other two parties are somehow leaving them behind, then there could be major electoral consequences. Electoral consequences where the Greens often run second to Labor, which means they're able to leapfrog Labor, take Labor preferences and then take Labor seats. And if the surge that took place, and they didn't win an awful lot, but the vote changed in many places around central Brisbane and other parts of local government areas, not to mention, of course, what happened in Ipswich West and Inala, as many as 6 seats could end up flipping to the Greens from Labor at the upcoming state election, a point made by the Greens candidate for mayor, who thankfully was not elected, but listen to the point that he shows about where their growth in the vote was.
We saw the biggest swings to us in the parts of the city where renters are really struggling the most, where we've seen big increases in rent. So obviously people liked our ideas. They really liked the idea of freezing rent increases for 2 years.
So 2 things here. We don't know how big a winner this is going to be for the Greens, but there are the early green shoots, forgive the pun and the jacket, that this could be a bit of a winner for the Greens. This could be a place where disaffected Labor voters, particularly in the Queensland election, may end up going to the Greens. But there are also cashed up former Liberals who now are starting to vote Green as well. Many of the people who moved to southeast Queensland from places like lockdown Melbourne or too busy Sydney, again, they take their politics with them to southeast Queensland, and it's changing. It's changing where the hard left is starting to move forward. So yes, that's their politics. The way they argue their politics is, of course, hypocritical because their own MPs are the ones that are that have taken advantage of the very schemes that they are wishing to cut off, but also pretending that only everyone but the Greens MPs are actually taken care of. But there is a very significant warning shot that both major parties need to wake up to, which is that if you vacate the field completely from any sort of policy to help somebody who is a renter to continue renting, then if there are no options on the table, why wouldn't you consider voting for the party that has a solution, let alone the right solution for you? We need to have a scenario where both major parties start to seriously look at policies that mean that people that are currently renting will be able to claim back some of the things that they spend while living in a rental property, say, on their tax. Remember the business asset write-off scheme where small businesses would be able to turn around and do things like if they were buying a printer or a cooker if it's their business, or maybe even a new car for their business. They could turn around and they could write the value off up to $120,000 per item off their tax. Well, where is the major party saying that if you want to put a mobile air conditioner into your rental property, you'd be able to claim it up against your tax? Where's the major party person saying the same about a woman who is fleeing a domestic violence situation, who needs to find the money to be able to pay for a couch, a TV, a fridge and a bed? These are the types of things that need to be discussed. Otherwise, if the only people talking to renters who will most likely be continuing to rent for the next 3 to 5 years, the only ones that have something on the table are the Greens. And the Greens, of course, have the stupid policies of saying that they can control your rent and set the market, when, of course, that's not the way that things work. But my appeal to both sides of major party politics, the Greens will continue to surge with 30% of Australians if you don't seem to be doing anything for them. Advice is what you pay for it, and my advice is free, but just do for renters what you've been able to do for some people in small business. Obviously, you put all the different tags and titles on it to make sure that it's not above a certain amount of money and rich kids end up doing it. We're talking about normal people that are struggling to keep a roof over their head.